Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Lori Hoover, intuitive guide and psychic medium. Together, let's wake the fuck up. Today's guest is an award winning author of children's environmental nonfiction. Her books not only share the wonder of nature, but specific ways in which we are connected to it. It is through these established connections that she hopes to prepare kids as future environmental leaders, and we most certainly need that. Please welcome Patricia Newman to the show.
Thank you for having me, Lori. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to have you here. And I want to say that I come very unprepared because I didn't want to have a set of questions ready to roll. I just want to have a conversation and find out, first and foremost, how did you come to be an author and why this particular topic and why kids?
Well, that's a really good question. I'll answer the why kids question first, because a lot of my friends ask me that question. Nobody really understands the industry of children's publishing except people who are in the industry. And I usually sort of give a glib answer. I write for kids because all my adult friends can already read. So I love kids. When I was in college, I studied child development. I taught for a while. I love kids. I love the way they think. I love the way they approach life. I love their commitment to certain things. And I also love the way that they're scatterbrained sometimes. So I think also, to answer why kids, our world is going to depend on our children. And we have certainly made enough mistakes that we can help show them how to avoid some of those mistakes in the future. I came to writing in the most accidental of ways. I was not one of those kids that sat under a shady tree and wrote her heart out in diaries or made up stories. In fact, I didn't really write much at all. I read a lot. I had a book wherever I went. And I went through them one after another as fast as I could. But I think in maybe fifth grade, when kids started to bully me, I sort of shut down. I realized that if I said anything, I would only get teased for it. So I just sort of stopped voicing my opinion, what I thought. And that really didn't change much until a little bit in high school, but definitely in college. And when I had my children, long after I graduated from college, I went to the library with them. I checked out the maximum number of picture books we could check out, and we plopped ourselves on the sofa and started reading. And my mother-in-law happened to be visiting. She said to me, "Patty, you could do this," meaning you could write kids' books. And before she said that, I never really thought about it. I joke with her. My mother-in-law has passed now, but when she was alive, I used to joke with her that I'm the only daughter-in-law that ever listened to her mother-in-law. But she gave me some great advice. It was not easy. There was a long apprenticeship trying to figure out what it was I wanted to say. And I wrote a few books that were published by traditional publishers. I wrote a few books that were work for hire. Again, just to build up my credits. I wrote some magazine articles. But then one day I was sitting at my kitchen table and I read an article about scientists from Scripps Institute in San Diego sailing to the North Pacific Central Gyre. I had no idea what a gyre was, but I followed their entire expedition. They blogged about it. And when they returned, I contacted them and asked if I could interview them for a book, because I had no idea that all of this plastic was accumulating in the North Pacific. And they were one of the very first groups of scientists going to study this problem. And in fact, they were all graduate students. So I thought this idea of students studying a problem nobody had ever studied before, about a problem most of us didn't know about, would be a fantastic idea. And that book became Plastic Ahoy, my first environmental title.
Wow. How much foresight would it take for you to think to reach out to them and contact them to discuss this thing and interview them about what they were doing? Because that put you in the forefront of all of it. Now it's more and more people are getting involved, and people know about what a massive issue this is across the globe.
I wish I could attribute it to foresight, but most people make the mistake of thinking that writers write for their audience. And while we're revising and putting it all, the whole package together to be published, yes, we do. But initially, when that first idea hits us, we write for ourselves. We write for me, I write about the things that I would have read about as a child. I write about the things that make me go, wow, right now as an adult. I never knew that before. The thing that you have to remember when you write for children is you have to find a way into the story that resonates with a child. You can't just start like a newspaper article. It's not just the facts, ma'am. A lot of people think that children's nonfiction is just the facts, but there are hours and hours of research and interview and reading and questioning and double checking that go into every single book that I write. And if I'm going to spend that kind of time on a project, then I have to absolutely fall in love with the idea.
Yeah, I understand that for sure. You have a lot of titles. You've got Planet Ocean, Eavesdropping on Elephants, Sea Otter Heroes, Zoo Scientists to the Rescue, the one you mentioned, Plastic Ahoy, Nama's Reason to Smile, and then your most recent, A River's Gifts. Can you tell us about any of these, if you'd like to share what any of them are about?
I'd love to share what they're about. Sea Otter Heroes came as a direct result of Plastic Ahoy. One of the scientists profiled in Plastic Ahoy, her name was Chelsea Rockman, invited me to it was a retreat for a fellowship that she was a member of. It was an environmental fellowship. And she asked me to speak about writing for children because she thought some of her colleagues with their own research would like to turn their work into a children's book. And I met Brent Hughes at that retreat. He was a scientist who had discovered a brand new trophic cascade involving sea otter heroes. And a trophic cascade is really a very fancy word for a food chain relationship. So most scientists, before Brent made this discovery, most scientists thought that the bottom of the food chain, the producers like the plants, had effects on the food chain. But he proved that an apex predator affected the health of the food chain, in this case, sea otters. And it was a groundbreaking discovery, and it explained why the seagrass in the Elkhorn Slough, which is an estuary off the Monterey Bay in California, was thriving instead of dying. And if you think about where in California the Monterey Bay is, it's in the middle of the Salinas Valley, which is where America's salad bowl is. Most of the United States vegetables are grown in that area. So you can imagine the amount of fertilizer that's flowing into the rivers and the estuary, and then therefore the ocean. And all of this whole sort of ecosystem should have been dead. The seagrass should have been dead, but it wasn't. And it was a huge ecological mystery. So that's what that book is about. And it just so happened that I met Brent Hughes at this retreat that I was there for Plastic Ahoy. Zoo Scientists to the Rescue and Eavesdropping on Elephants came about because my daughter was a zookeeper. And we were always talking about zoo stories. one of the things that we talked about was the fact that zoos kind of get a bad rap. And granted, there are some zoos that are not the best quality
Yes.
in terms of the way they care for their animals and the design of the enclosures. But many zoos are doing a lot of research, not only in their own labs, but in wild spaces. And that's one thing about framing children's nonfiction. Remember, I said you have to find this hook that might resonate with a child. I came upon this idea that zoos are like living libraries. They sort of catalog animals for us that we would probably never see unless we went to a zoo. And they do that in three ways. They educate the public. They do several captive breeding and reintroduction into the wild programs. And they do on-site research. So I used 3 different animals, orangutans, black-footed ferrets, and black rhinos, as examples of those 3 concepts. In eavesdropping on elephants, my daughter used to work for the Elephant Listening Project when she attended Cornell University. And she introduced me to the scientists there. And while I didn't get to go to Africa to see their work, I did sit in their lab and listen to a lot of acoustic recordings. You see, they study elephants by listening to them. They don't necessarily watch them. They are making determinations of how elephants use the forest in Africa. These are forest elephants, not the savanna elephants that we most often see in the wide open spaces of Kenya and Tanzania. But these forest elephants are using the forest in very specialized ways. And the cool thing that I thought about eavesdropping on elephants was the elephants are actually responsible for the forest. If the elephants didn't live there, the forest wouldn't exist because they eat the fruit, they digest the fruit, they get rid of the seeds in their feces, which plant those seeds for the next trees to grow. And it's just a cycle that happens over and over and over and over. And it's how other animals and the native peoples of those regions use the forests because of the elephants. But I thought that this idea of studying elephants simply through sound was a fascinating concept. And so that's eavesdropping on elephants.
I love the title too. I really do. I love that.
I do too. I do too. And it's surprising how many sounds elephants make. The cool thing about that book, Lori, is that the scientists were very, very generous with their sound files. So there are QR codes in that book. So readers can scan the QR codes with their devices and hear the elephant sounds as the scientists heard them.
Wow. I love that. That is fantastic.
It is. It's a fantastic, we're trying to bring technology to everything, right? And why not books?
Oh, absolutely. And if it's little in that it's a simple thing really to scan the code, but at the same time, it's huge because it's so experiential for them.
Yes.
And if you can get a kid hooked on books, oh, that's fantastic.
Exactly. And the way we use the QR codes in eavesdropping on elephants is I've told a story in sort of a pullout section about an individual elephant. And so the children read the story about the elephant. There's their photograph about that story, but then they scan the QR code and they can hear the story happening.
Wow. I love that. That is so cool. And honestly, that is something that I think would be really fun and interesting, even for adults. I mean, who wouldn't love that? Because, let's face it, we don't all get an opportunity to experience elephants like that.
Exactly.
Very few of us do.
Exactly. And video and audio are becoming so popular. With your podcast, people are listening to podcasts more and more. People watch videos rather than read news reports. So these other sorts of media, why not bring them to books? Why not expand the story?
I love the idea. Love, love, love it.
So that brings me to Planet Ocean.
Oh,
Planet
yeah.
Ocean is the 3rd book I did with photographer and filmmaker Annie Crawley. We worked together on Plastic Ahoy because she was the photographer on the expedition that the scientists went on. And then we worked on Zoo Scientists to the Rescue together, which was sort of a land-based book. But then we went to Planet Ocean, and Annie is a Women's Hall of Fame diver. She has 20 plus years of experience diving in our ocean. She's a requested guide and photographer for scientific research, and she's an advocate for our ocean. So we teamed up one more time and we wrote a book about our connection to the ocean, Planet Ocean. And that book also has QR codes in it, QR codes that bring children into the coral triangle, QR codes that dive below the Salish Sea so they can see the green tint in the water caused by phytoplankton. We have a video below the ice in the Arctic. It's an amazing, amazing, I think I am saying it's an amazing, amazing book, but the visuals and the video are absolutely stunning and bring that book far beyond the level of book into multimedia experience.
Yeah, I've never heard of such a thing, really. And even though you say that these are children's books, I think that's such an amazing idea. And I think every person should read them, not just kids.
Well, I think what some people can find in children's nonfiction books, I write for the middle grade readers, so the 8-year-old to 12-year-old. And, if you're an adult who doesn't necessarily want to know every single fact about a topic or read the definitive book about a specific topic, pick up a children's book. They're well researched, they're well laid out, they're beautifully designed, they have beautiful photographs in them. And like I said, a couple of mine have QR codes in them. So start with a children's book and see if you want to learn more after that.
Seriously, it's fantastic. So after Planet Ocean, let's see, you have Zoo Scientists to the Rescue and Nama's Reason to Smile. And then I would love it if you would go into your most recent, A River's Gifts.
Right. Okay. So I talked a little bit about Zoo Scientists to the Rescue already. My daughter was a zookeeper.
Yeah.
Nama's Reason to Smile is not an environmental book, but when I'm used to talking to multi-purpose rooms full of children, 500, 600 children at a time. And they asked me, well, environmental books, and then you have Nama's Reason to Smile. How do the two sort of compute? And I usually say to them, well, because I was a kid that was bullied, my sense of injustice is finely tuned. And whenever I spot injustice, I feel like I have to write about it because I feel like that helps me in some way fix that injustice. So that's what Nama's Reason to Smile is about. A little girl in Kenya who really wants to go to school, but doesn't have the wherewithal to get there. School is free in Kenya, but she has to have money for uniforms and supplies. And her family is living on basically at a subsistence level, and she can't afford those things. And while I didn't want to tell the single African story about the poor child that couldn't go to school, this particular book is based on a real school in Mtwapa, Kenya. And it sort of features, my main character, Nama, is sort of a composite of many of the children who wind up at the Jumbo Jipya school because they cannot afford the government school. So this other private school was sort of taking in the other children who would otherwise fall through the cracks. And it is a totally African-run school, Kenyan headmaster, Kenyan teachers, Kenyan administrators. So it was a heart book for me. A friend of mine came to me and asked if I would be willing to write the story of this school. And how could I not?
Right. I agree with you. And even though it may not be environmental, it is still about humanity. It's about taking care of each other and showing up for one another, and that she would have this opportunity through this other school to go and get the education that she sought is fantastic.
Right.
And that is still very much in alignment with what I'm doing on this podcast, because it's all about that connection. It is all about the fact that we are all connected.
We are all connected, and connection is the theme for A River's Gifts. This river that has been around for millennia supported itself and its wildlife and the whole ecosystem without any human intervention. It nourished a salmon run. As the salmon, the tribal elders that I spoke to said that salmon used to be so big and so populated in the river that you could almost walk across their backs to cross the river. And then when the strong people arrived, the strong people is the English name for, in the Clallam language, for the lower Elwha Clallam tribe. That's what I guess they're officially called, but they call themselves the strong people. When the strong people arrived, the river nourished them too. And I don't know how much your listeners know about salmon, but salmon are an anadromous fish, and that's basically just a fancy word that means they're born in fresh water, and after they grow up a little bit, they swim to the ocean, finish growing in salt water, migrating all over the place, and then before they spawn, they return to their natal stream, and if they're females, lay their eggs, if they're males, fertilize eggs, and then they die on the banks of that stream. And their bodies, with all of their marine nutrients that they have gathered for 3, 4, 5, 7 years, nourishes the soil that grows the trees and the ferns and the plants, and nourishes the mice and the elk and the bear and the birds. So it's this ecosystem is entirely dependent on the salmon doing what they do.
Wow.
And this book is about the Elwha River Restoration Project. The Elwha River flows north from the Olympic Mountains. It starts in the Olympic Mountains and flows north to the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And in the early 1800s, a man named Thomas Aldwell came to this struggling frontier town and saw the power in the river and built a dam. He built the Elwha Dam. And at that time, it's so unusual. At that time, in the early 1800s, there was a state law in Washington that said all dams must have a fish ladder for fish to pass. But for some reason, the Elwha Dam was built without a fish ladder. In fact, the requirement was waived by state officials. So now we have this dam. Fish can't pass. They can't return to their headwaters. They can't return to their spawning grounds. A few years later, the Glines Canyon Dam is built a little farther upriver. So now we have a second dam without any fish passage as well. And you can imagine what happened to the fish. They dwindled. They returned from the sea after they grew up, but they just, kept running into the dam wall. They couldn't get to where they needed to spawn. And for the most part, they died. And then something sort of miraculous happened. The Glines Canyon Dam came up for renewal at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. But in the ensuing years, the Glines Canyon Dam was almost entirely, the Glines Canyon Dam was now in the Olympic National Park, which meant that the license couldn't be renewed. And that sort of gave the strong people hope. Let's tear the dams down. And that's what A River's Gifts is about. It's about the importance of the river. It's about the dams going up. It's about this magical moment that happened that gave the strong people and government officials and citizens hope that maybe we could tear these dams down and restore the ecosystem. And spoiler alert, I guess, the dams did come down. Everybody was wondering, there's this point in the book where it said the dams did come down. And then the big question was, would the fish return? And then in the book, it says everyone waited. And then there's a page turn, right? There's a little suspense there. And then 3 days later, a Chinook salmon swam past the former dam sites. And the fish are starting to return. And I think that's one thing that we need to remember in our dealings with nature, is that nature will survive if we get out of the way. We just have to learn how to get out of the way and how to live more sustainably. And I'm not saying that we all have to live in the dark and not drive and not fly, but then I think that we need to invest more in energy efficient fuels, energy efficient vehicles. We have to do things like eliminate plastic. Whenever we make decisions, we have to keep the environment as part of that decision. Make sure that it's still a player at the table. Make sure that we are the voice for the environment.
Yes, I agree with you 1,000%. And for me, it's almost like not only keeping the environment as a player at the table, it needs to be right there in the front, first and foremost, because what are we doing here? And what are we going to leave our children and their children? And there are so many different options now available for people to start to live more sustainably. Like I switched to bamboo toilet paper and paper towel, and my hair products are now bar things that come in little cardboard boxes. And there are ways that we can get away from using these plastics. Even my laundry detergent, it comes in a cardboard pack and it's a sheet that dissolves in the washing machine.
Right. But there's still, because of the way capitalism works, the goods that have the most demand that are most popular have the most pull. And I think we as consumers need to use our purchasing power to purchase the very things that you were listing. But the one thing that still bothers me about all of that is most of the eco-friendly goods that you buy or are available are more expensive than the non-eco-friendly goods, which seems backwards to me. Why can't we, I don't know, lower the price on eco-friendly goods and put like the cigarettes have a sin tax, put cigarettes, alcohol, put a sin tax on non-environmentally friendly products.
Yes.
So our economy is still a little bit backwards about that. I'm not pretending to have the answer, but I think we need to start electing officials that are willing to think outside the box, propose different solutions, look at different answers, different countries, cultures, whatever it takes to make sure that the environment continues to support us and we begin to think more and more about supporting our environment with the decisions that we make.
Yes, and this needs to be a worldview. It can't just be supporting us here in the States, for instance. There are so many people who are all about things that are made in the USA and this and that. And they go on and on and on about it. But at the end of the day, we're all people. We're all human. We all need to look out for each other. And I was just talking about this the other day, how sad it is that there are still people that don't have fresh water available to them. There are people who are still going hungry when we here in the States are throwing away ungodly amounts of food. It's ridiculous what goes in the trash. And I just feel like having conversations like this with people like you is going to get the wheels turning for people so that they can start thinking about different options. How can we fix this? How
Well, I
can
think the point, I think one of the points that we need to mention, Lori, is that environmental problems are daunting. We are quite literally assaulted by environmental headlines, gloom and doom every single day. I mean, just the fact that the Supreme Court doesn't think that the EPA can regulate environmental statutes and laws is just one example, right? But I think what we need to tell your listeners is that start small, start local, do something, whatever that something is, because the minute you do something, the minute you consistently pack a zero waste lunch, or the minute you consistently have kids ride bikes to school, if of course, if it's safe and your school is close enough, the minute you encourage your child to form a blue crew or a green team at school, and they start thinking and talking about the environment as a partner in school, the minute you do that one thing, whatever it is, it gets easier. It gets easier. And then you start to see, oh, well, I packed a zero waste lunch. I can buy barbecue sauce in a glass container rather than a plastic one. I can buy a shampoo bar instead of shampoo in a plastic bottle. I can chew toothpaste bites instead of buying toothpaste in a plastic tube. So you start to see more and more and more ways that your purchasing power can affect the decisions that corporations are making.
Yes. Yes, I agree with you.
But it all comes back to that connection. And, you know, if you happen to pick up a copy of River's Gifts and read it, that connection to between river, animals, people is absolutely undeniable. And it's not as if the Elwha River is a special instance. Every single one of us live in a river basin that drains our area, that we pull fish from, that we pull water from to irrigate our lands, that helps our communities to keep from flooding, that provides recreation, that provides trade. Every single river in the United States has the same power that the Elwha River has. And in fact, most people don't know this, Lori, but nearly 2,000 dams have been removed from United States rivers since about 1912. The Elwha is not an isolated incident. Removing dams on old, unused, unsafe dams to restore a river ecosystem is something that's happening across the country.
That's fantastic. Like I said, Patricia, earlier, that the premise of the podcast really is to help people either wake up to or just remember the fact that we are all connected to everyone, to everything, the planet, all of its inhabitants. And I mean, all of them,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can shift the way that we're showing up in the world. And with that in mind, and I do ask this of everybody, but based on your experiences and your current areas of expertise, what one thing would you recommend to someone to help them wake the fuck up?
What one thing would I recommend? When I talk to children, the one thing that I recommend is packing a zero waste lunch, because they have control over that. It has to be something you have control over. I'm a science kid. I mean, I always was a science kid. I loved science, and I write a lot of science in my books now. So I have studied the climate science. I believe in the climate science. So climate change is not a debatable issue for me. For somebody who's not necessarily there yet, I would suggest you simply look at one graph called the Keeling curve. You can find it online. Just look up Keeling curve. And it is a graph that charts hundreds of thousands of years. And you'll see for the first many hundreds of thousands of years that it's not a straight line. It has its ups and downs, but it has a very narrow margin of up and down. But then when we get to about the Industrial Revolution, sort of somewhere in the 1800s, turn of the century, 1900s, when machines have become more and more and more popular, the curve starts to rise. And from about 1950 on, the curve is not even a curve, it's almost a vertical line. And what this line is measuring is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so for this first several hundred years, where the line is going up and down in a very narrow margin, those are all ice core samples that scientists have drilled through the ice, and they've done their measurements, and they can calculate about how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere. And then once you get to this Industrial Revolution, turn of the 20th century, the curve starts going straight up. And again, it's measuring carbon dioxide, and it is still going up. And I know that some of the climate deniers will say that, well, there have been lots of events in our planet's history that increase and decrease the amount of carbon. But the fact that it coincides with the age of machines, when the several hundred years before that, all of these climactic events were taking place and the amount of carbon dioxide was still in a very narrow margin, the Keeling curve just proves that climate change is a thing. And if you don't believe that, just look outside your door. Are you being flooded? Are you being burned? Are you being roasted alive because of the heat? I told you before we started that yesterday in Sacramento, it was 114 degrees. That's where I live. That's way too hot. It was never 114 degrees. So just look at what's happening. The fact that our fresh water is drying up, that Europe, the rivers are drying up. They're really worried about Europe becoming a desert. So there are changes happening, and time is running out, really. So going back to what's the one thing that you could do? The one thing that you can do is lift your voice and make a stand for the environment. Whether you lift your voice and vote for somebody who's pro-environment, or protest somebody who's not, or again, use your purchasing power to, I don't know, as an example, stop Starbucks flooding the world with plastic cups and lids, or stop the plastic industry from continually touting recycling when it's proven that it doesn't really work. We only recycle about 10% of the plastic that we bring into the environment. And that's why we have such a horrible plastic problem in our ocean and near our rivers and on our streets. So the one thing that you can do is raise your voice. Just pick the way that resonates with you.
I love that, because it is something that we can all do exactly the way you said, with whatever methodology resonates the strongest for us. And I think too, there's no more pretending. We really can't pretend that we don't know anymore, that we don't know any better, because the information is everywhere. You hear about it all the time. And we know, like you said, that less than 10%, I think, is being recycled. And there are so many specifics to it. It has to be, you have to clean it completely out. You have to remove any kind of labeling and things like that. And it's just ridiculous what has to happen. And too many people aren't willing to do that. Start with whatever you can do.
Right. So if you're one of those ones that doesn't want to wash out your plastic, I mean, we're supposed to be conserving water here in Sacramento. We're in severe drought restrictions. So for me to wash out a plastic container, that's a giant waste of water. So even if I put it in the dishwasher, it's still filling up my dishwasher and wasting water. So I choose to buy as many products as I possibly can that are not in plastic containers. I choose when I go to the produce section of my grocery store to I've purchased these net bags, drawstring net bags as produce bags, and I do not use those plastic bags that the grocery store so kindly provides. So any way you can think of to make a difference and to use your power as a consumer to, again, lift your voice.
Yes, most definitely. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I want to thank you again so much for joining me and having this talk. I will have this information up in the show notes, but for anybody who would like to find out more about you, what you're doing, how they can get a hold of your books, things like that, how would they go about getting in touch?
Well, my website is patriciamnewman.com. Don't forget that middle initial, patriciamnewman.com. And you can buy my books on Amazon or bookshop.org, perhaps if you'd like to support your local indie, or Barnes and Noble. So I hope you get out there and start connecting your kids to nature.
Yes, absolutely. And I think before we wrap it up, because we didn't really talk about that other than through a book like one that you've written, what would be the easiest way for somebody to do that, to go about getting their kids involved and interested in connecting with nature? What would you recommend to somebody?
Go outside.
Just that.
Go outside, take a walk in the woods, turn over some rocks, listen to the birds and try to find them. Sit in your backyard and just close your eyes and listen to the sounds. I'm sure you'll hear a few leaf blowers and lawnmowers, but try to listen to the squirrels. The squirrels in my backyard are arguing constantly. They're hysterical. I've heard owls in my backyard. What do you smell? Ask your kids to kids are curious. If you just release them into the backyard and say, find the coolest thing under a rock you can find, that's a challenge. They will do it. Set up a water table with some sand and make your own river. I've got a curriculum guide on my website for a river's gifts that shows you how to make a river. So just do some of these activities with kids. Go down to the beach or to a river or to a lake or to a pond and stick your feet in. Feel the goo at the bottom. Look at the insects touching down on the water. Take up a handful of mud and see what lives there.
Yeah, great ideas, all great ideas. One of the things that I used to do with my son when he was younger was we would go out and we would go to a park and we would just see if there were any kind of bugs or anything like that that we could find. And I would photograph them. And then we would come back and look at the pictures and we would look them up and do a little bit of research to see what is this thing.
What a wonderful idea.
Oh,
I
it was
love
so
that.
much fun. So much fun. I've got some really amazing pictures of bugs and things like that because of that. So,
Wonderful. You can make your own nature guide.
yes. Again, I want to thank you so much. I'm so grateful for the fact that there are people like you who are out there doing this and starting with the kids because they are the future of all of this. And so thank you, thank you, thank you for showing up the way that you are, and keep it up, really, because we need more of this.
Great. Thank you so much. I fully plan to keep showing up. Don't worry about that.
Well, is there anything that you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. Even though we had a conversation, I felt like it was very thorough. It was very thorough. But I think that I do hope that people, your listeners, take inspiration from the strong people, the scientists, the government officials that worked on the Elwha River Restoration Project. In this age of divisiveness and I feel like disunity, this is a story about community and unification, and the fact that if we pull together, we get a lot more done than if we're constantly sniping at each other. And our connection to nature, of course, goes without saying for me, but the fact that this is a story about nature that also ties us all together is, I feel like it's like the perfect conservation story. It's finally a conservation story that has a happy ending.
Yes, 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 yes. Well, thank you again for joining me. I'm very happy that you took the time to be with me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Of course. And I want to say thanks to everybody who tuned in today. As always, I am so grateful for your presence. And I'll see you all back here next Sunday with another episode as we continue to wake the fuck up.